The snowstorm raged like a living beast across the Montana plains, sweeping away tracks, drowning sound, and testing the strength of every living thing caught in its merciless grip, and through that furious whiteout rode Colton Hayes, a cowboy molded by hardship and solitude, his scarf pulled high against the stinging cold, his broad hat rimmed with frost, and his steady hands guiding his horse buck through drifts that swallowed lesser men whole, for Colton had been restless all evening. Something deep in his gut urging him to ride, a whisper of fate pushing him forward into the storm where no sane man would wander, and it was there, beneath a bank of swirling snow, that his sharp eyes caught the faintest movement, a shadow slumped, a form nearly lost to the night, and when he leapt from the saddle his boots sank deep into the frost as he pulled aside the snow to reveal the frozen face of a young woman, lips blue, lashes crusted with ice, arms clutching a bundle so tightly it seemed to be the last thread binding her to this world, and when Colton brushed the blanket back he heard it, the faint, trembling cry of a newborn, fragile but fierce enough to claw through the roar of the storm, and in that moment the hardened cowboy felt something ignite inside his chest, something beyond duty or mercy, something like destiny itself, and without hesitation he stripped off his heavy coat, wrapping both mother and child inside its warmth, pulling them close to his own body as if to lend them his fire, whispering through clenched teeth, "That's my family now," a vow carried on the wind like a brand against the night, and with that oath driving him, he lifted the limp woman into Buck's saddle, secured the baby against her chest, and mounted behind them, urging the horse toward the dark tree line where his cabin lay hidden from the worst of the storm, every hoofbeat a battle, every gust threatening to tear them from him. Yet his grip never faltered, his jaw never unclenched, for he would see them safe if it cost him everything, and when at last the dim glow of his lantern flickered through the pines, Colton's heart surged with fierce relief, he kicked open the cabin door, carried them to his bed, piled every blanket he owned upon their shivering bodies, and stoked the fire until the flames roared bright enough to chase death from the room, his rough hands rubbing warmth back into frozen fingers, his calloused palm resting gently against the baby's chest. To feel the fragile rise and fall of breath, and as he worked he studied the woman's face, delicate even beneath frostbite, her strength evident in the way she had fought to shield her child against the storm, and Colton, who had walked alone for so many years, felt a truth strike him harder than any bullet or brawl. That fate had brought him to this moment, that in saving them he had saved himself, and as the storm howled outside and firelight bathed the room in gold, Colton Hayes, the cowboy who had never believed in miracles, sat vigil through the night, whispering prayers and promises to two strangers who were strangers no more, for in his heart he already knew he would never let them go. Dawn crept slowly across the snowbound land, painting the sky in pale shades of rose and gold, but inside Colton Hayes's cabin the world was still hushed except for the soft crackle of the fire and the faint, fragile breaths of the two souls he had carried from death's edge, and as the cowboy leaned forward in his chair, eyes heavy yet unyielding after a sleepless night, he saw movement. The woman stirred beneath the mound of blankets, her lashes fluttering against pale cheeks, her lips parting as though to ask whether she yet lived. And when her eyes at last opened, wide and uncertain, the first thing she saw was a stranger's rugged face watching her with a mix of concern and relief, his broad shoulders draped in a shirt too thin for the lingering cold, his eyes steady and kind, and she gasped, clutching instinctively at the bundle in her arms, only to find the baby safe and warm, wrapped tightly in layers that smelled faintly of smoke and leather, its tiny chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. And tears welled in her eyes as the memory of the storm returned, how the wind had stolen her breath, how her legs had failed, how she had whispered prayers into the night knowing no one would hear, until this man had appeared like some figure carved out of the storm itself. Colton spoke softly then, his voice low and rough like gravel smoothed by years of wind, telling her she was safe now, telling her not to try to rise yet, and when she asked in a broken whisper who he was, he simply said, "Name's Colton Hayes. Just a cowboy who rode where he was meant to ride." The woman gave her name, Clara, and her voice trembled as she explained she had been fleeing a life too cruel to bear, a man who had promised love but brought only fear, and she had run with nothing but her child and her will to keep that child alive, and though shame flickered in her eyes as she spoke of it, Colton saw only strength, for he knew what it meant to fight the impossible with nothing but grit. As the day passed, he tended to them both with hands surprisingly gentle for a man who had spent his life with rope and reins, cooking broth over the fire, offering water in small sips, adjusting blankets when the chill crept in, and though words were few, trust began to take root in that small room, born not of speeches but of actions, the kind that spoke louder than any vow. Clara watched him move about the cabin, his every gesture marked by quiet determination, and though fear still lingered in her heart, another feeling stirred beside it. Hope, fragile but persistent, hope that maybe fate had led her to someone who would not abandon her. When night fell again, the storm easing beyond the walls, Colton sat near the fire, gazing at the child who now slept peacefully in Clara's arms, and something in his chest tightened, a realization settling over him with the weight of truth, that when he had spoken into the storm, claiming them as his family, it had not been a moment's impulse but a vow already carved into his bones, and though he had lived years believing the road was meant to be walked alone, he now understood that destiny had given him a different trail, one that began with a woman and her child rescued from the snow. Clara, watching the flames dance, whispered her thanks, her voice breaking, but Colton only shook his head and told her she owed him nothing, that what mattered now was tomorrow, and the day after, and every day he could keep them safe. The fire burned low, the cabin warm, and for the first time in many years Colton Hayes allowed himself a small smile, knowing the storm outside had not merely tried to take life, it had delivered life, love, and a purpose greater than any he had known. And as the night deepened, he glanced toward Clara and her child, and in a voice softer than the wind itself he whispered, "You're not alone anymore," a promise that would guide every choice he made from that day forward. Please subscribe my channel.